Good evening. I'm Jennifer Rabb and have the wonderful privilege of serving as the president of this extraordinary institution, Hunter College, which is home to Roosevelt House. It is a great pleasure to welcome you to this important conversation tonight. We gathered this evening at a very important time for Hunter College as we begin a series of events to mark Hunter's 150th anniversary as a school of public learning and also as a school of female empowerment. And also in this remarkable place, the house which Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt received as a combination wedding and Christmas present from his mother, Sarah, back in 1908. The happy couple and Franklin's mom moved in, and just 4 years after Franklin's first visit to the island of Puerto Rico in 1904, which is part of a tour to Puerto Rico and Cuba that his mother, Sarah, took Franklin on. As many of you may know, Franklin Roosevelt recovered from polio in this house and went on to run his 1928 gubernatorial campaign from here, and then 4 years later ran for president from this house. President-elect Franklin Roosevelt made this building his transition headquarters from November 1932 through the beginning of March 1933, when by tradition of the day, the inauguration to president took place. It was here that the model program of old age pensions that had been introduced in Albany was expanded, the program that of course became known as Social Security. It was here that the Roosevelt Brain Trust added to their reform program, minimum wage and child labor laws. And it was here that the outlines of the rest of the New Deal were devised by this Brain Trust that met upstairs in the President-elect's library every day from the election to the inauguration. Franklin and Eleanor both visited Puerto Rico in the early days of the New Deal in 1934. Franklin called it, quote, a wonderful island, was inspired by what he deemed its, quote, splendid spirit, and noted the progress that had been made there since his first visit 30 years earlier. Most meaningfully, he recognized the responsibility of the U.S. government to address the problems facing the entire nation, including in Puerto Rico. I believe in better homes, he declared in San Juan, a better family life, better living conditions, a better chance at education, better health conditions, and a better chance for every person to earn his livelihood. As he put it with his typical forceful optimism, I am looking forward to solving these problems here in the island just as quickly as we should solve them in the continental part of the United States. For her part, Eleanor wrote lovingly about Puerto Rico in her column for the Ladies' Home Companion. Without glossing over the poverty and exploitation she and her husband had witnessed, she issued a clarion call to fight against child labor there. In her autobiography, Eleanor wrote, on my return, I begged my husband to send down some labor people and industrialists to look over the situation. A year later, in 1935, Franklin established the Puerto Rican Reconstruction Administration, which provided for agricultural development, public works, and electrification of the island. At the time of the Roosevelt's 1934 visit, Puerto Rico was still struggling to overcome the effects of a devastating 1932 hurricane, San Ciprian, which had compounded the damage caused by Hurricane San Felipe not too long before it. Much like today, the recovery and the rebuilding process was long, difficult, and traumatic. At Hunter, we have long supported an important link to Puerto Rico by becoming a national hub for Puerto Rican studies. We are the very proud home of Centro, our Center for Puerto Rican Studies, as well as our Department of Africana and Puerto Rican Latino Studies, which just celebrated its 50th anniversary, and where our guest of honor, Yarma Bonilla, teaches. Yarma Bonilla has become the nation's leading voice, not just on the current state of Puerto Rico, but on the long and complicated history that has brought the island to this point. Her new book, which we'll discuss tonight, Aftershocks of Disaster, Puerto Rico Before and After the Storm, covers just that, with more than 30 experts on Puerto Rico examining every aspect of Hurricane Maria's impact and placing the event in both emotional and historic context. The book's title, Aftershocks of Disaster, has been given frightening new meaning by a series of earthquakes, including the 6.4 magnitude earthquake on January 7th and the ongoing threats of further shocks since then. We're so pleased that Yarma was able to make it back from Puerto Rico in time for this event after a long stay working with local communities and providing firsthand, on-the-ground reporting of current conditions for places like the Daily News and the Washington Post. We are so pleased that Yarma will be joined in this conversation to discuss the book and some of what has happened in its publication by Frances Robles, a Pulitzer Prize-winning correspondent for the New York Times based in Florida. Her investigative work on the death count after Hurricane Maria led to the government hiring specialists to determine the true death toll. She is truly one of the great reporters of our day and one of the great voices. It is a pleasure now to welcome Yarimar and Frances Robles to this podium, and I think, Yarimar, you're going to start with a short film. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. I'm going to start with just a short clip. I don't know Juan Carlos if he's arrived yet, but when I started doing presentations for the Aftershocks book, I decided that I wanted to have some kind of video to show at the beginning, because normally if it's a novel or a book of poems, the author might read from the book. But since this is an anthology and a collection of voices, I really wanted to show the different perspectives that were in the book. So I asked Juan Carlos Davila, who's just arriving here, a wonderful documentarian and journalist in Puerto Rico. I called him one day and said, "Hey, Juan Carlos, are you busy today? Do you mind coming over and just filming me for a few minutes talking about this book?" And that has morphed into a large video project that will be a website also that will serve as a kind of digital companion to the book. So we're just going to show a little bit of it here, very rough cut, and then we will open up for conversation.
I'm Yarimar Bonilla. I'm one of the editors of Aftershocks of Disaster, Puerto Rico Before and After the Storm. I'm here in Guanica, Puerto Rico, on the southern coast of the island, which just 2 years after Maria was hit by back-to-back earthquakes that brought its school and many of its homes to the ground. When we wrote the book, Aftershocks of Disaster, we had no way of knowing that the metaphor would become so apt for thinking about the current landscape of Puerto Rico. The book Aftershocks of Disaster is a collection of essays by writers, scholars, activists, and journalists talking about the consequences of Hurricane Maria and what set the stage for it to become such a humanitarian crisis. In the book, we use the language of earthquakes to talk about the temporality of disasters, how difficult it is to say when they begin and when they end, what is the main shock, what is the foreshock, and what is the aftershock. Although traditionally used in the context of earthquakes, all disasters can be imagined as involving a series of aftershocks. Those repetitive jolts that happen when state agencies fail, when disaster capitalism rolls in, when individuals are displaced and trauma is compounded. This video features interviews with many of the contributors to the volume. They'll talk to you about what motivated them to write their pieces and how they see the current landscape in Puerto Rico now, after a huge tidal wave of protests led to the resignation of the island's governor, and as they now face the aftermath of this new series of shocks.
Photojournalists are there to capture things as they happen. But we have a responsibility to respectfully represent the communities that are allowing us to be there with our cameras, especially in a situation of pain and trauma. There's a fine line between documenting and exploitation. I tend to think before pressing the shutter. I work slowly. I try to avoid reproducing an image of helplessness.
Erica is a photojournalist based in San Juan. In the wake of Hurricane Maria, she was one of the lead photographers covering the aftermath for international outlets such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, and CNN. We met in her home in Rio Piedras to discuss the politics of representation in disaster contexts.
Esto es gente en Ponce haciendo fila, durmiendo frente a una hielera. Esto fue en Humacao, en el Ralph's de Humacao. Siempre recuerdo este supermercado porque el pasillo donde se supone que había agua, lo que había eran botellones de Pepsi, así como todo el pasillo completo. Esta fue en Barrio Bubao, en Utuado. Es una foto que me gusta mucho, aunque realmente no es porque sea feliz ni bonita. Un retrato de país. Puerto Rico envejecido, con pocos recursos, soñando con lo que va a llegar, o lo que esperan que llegue.
Otras personas que contribuyeron al libro han hablado de lo difícil que fue para ellos la producción artística durante ese tiempo y algunos agarraron un medio que no era el que usualmente usaban. ¿Cómo tú pudiste agarrar tu cámara? ¿Cómo trabajaste eso durante ese tiempo?
Pues realmente yo nunca me lo cuestioné porque realmente ya estaba trabajando previo a y creo que en el proceso nunca me cuestioné como que, no quiero hacer fotos, porque realmente para mí es mi responsabilidad, es como el espacio en donde estoy trabajando para las publicaciones que trabajo, sé que estoy en un espacio de privilegio, entonces es como yo tomo eso y digo que si va a salir representación de Puerto Rico, yo quiero que lo hagamos nosotros mismos. No es que no pueda venir nadie de afuera, pero obviamente hay un empoderamiento en el poder contar nuestras propias historias. Mi contribución en el libro es una reflexión al trabajo y la cobertura que hice en María y a cuestionar la representación que se hace en los desastres a la gente, no solo en Puerto Rico, sino a nivel en la industria de las noticias. Yo nunca había cubierto un desastre, o sea, esto para mí María fue como, había cubierto Irma en las Islas Vírgenes, pero había sido visitas de 4 horas. So, ese mes fue como el crash course en desastre, pero siempre, mi trabajo personal, o sea, fuera de la cobertura de María, siempre ha sido cuestionarme cómo se representa Puerto Rico y la identidad puertorriqueña, más allá de los clichés, y la iconografía boricua así sexualizada y todo es bello y el paraíso, sino como realmente se vive el Puerto Rico y la cotidianidad puertorriqueña. Yo soy muy cautelosa cuando la gente está teniendo momentos emocionales bien fuertes. No es que no haga las imágenes, las he hecho en algunos momentos, pero creo que son imágenes que me aguanto a ver, o sea, vale la pena hacer esta imagen, realmente yo necesito retratar a esta señora aquí llorando que acaba de perder su casa o teniendo una crisis emocional, o sea, cuán ético es de mi parte, cuán responsable es de mi parte tomar ese momento o no. Y esto es un debate en el fotoperiodismo, o sea, hay gente que te va a decir, no, tú tienes que ir y hacer todas las fotos porque esa es la realidad y es lo que está pasando. Pero yo creo, para mí, como yo trabajo, yo creo que tiene que haber un entendimiento diferente, en especial en desastres, y porque lo hemos visto, o sea, se vio en Haití, se ha visto en otros desastres donde se hace una explotación del sufrimiento de la gente y de representar a la gente solamente en el espacio de sufrimiento y carencia, y eso no es toda la historia. Tomando en cuenta el contexto colonial, la historia de la representación del país, para mí era importante romper con esos estereotipos, romper con el estereotipo, o sea, no romper, pero que yo no creara imágenes que alimentaran el estereotipo de Puerto Rico, it's the island of brown people that need help.
Note for a friend who wants to commit suicide after the hurricane. No one teaches us to accept death because death stays empty inside, the great hole of fuck it that wants to devour us. No one explains how we can become part of the impossible new world that is tomorrow, or how we are supposed to avoid falling into the perfect and permanent under-eye circle we call facing the day. Mana, how not to understand? That is the question I avoid with the organizational fervor of a rescue team that never arrives. But I'll tell you this, desire isn't always followed by death.
Raquel Salas Rivera is an acclaimed poet who served as the Poet Laureate of Philadelphia from 2018 to 2019. They are the author of a number of award-winning books dealing with issues of colonialism, migration, identity, and historical trauma. I sat down with them in Old San Juan.
Después del huracán María, tú fuiste nombrada poeta laureada de Filadelfia y durante ese tiempo estabas bien activa, escribiendo, sacaste tu libro sobre María. ¿Me puedes decir cómo fue esa experiencia de escribir sobre María, de dar presentaciones, cómo se recibió tu trabajo? ¿Cómo fue todo eso?
En realidad fue como una avalancha, porque a mí un amigo me convenció de que solicitara en pleno esfuerzo organizativo para recaudar fondos en una barra de Filadelfia. Una amiga me dijo, ¿por qué tú no solicitas a poeta laureada? Y yo, bueno, yo no soy de Filadelfia. Eso no importa. Y así me sorprendió mucho que me escogieron. y me sentí como a la vez con mucha presión, ¿no? Porque como personas solicitaron que de nuevo han vivido toda su vida en Filadelfia y no sabía qué derecho tenía yo a ocupar esa posición. Y por otra parte estaba lidiando con todo lo que estaba pasando en Puerto Rico, a tal punto que el día que me inauguraron, era el día que le volvió la luz a mi abuela en su casa y me llamó así como para felicitarme. Yo estaba como así en un torbellino emocional de wow, qué lindo que me han reconocido, pero a la vez como lo veía muy ligado a todo lo que estaba ocurriendo en Puerto Rico.
Y el poema que sale en Aftershock para una amiga que está contemplando suicidarse, cuéntame de ese poema, que te motivó a escribirlo.
Bueno, algo que yo creo que tú lo has mencionado antes y varias personas lo han mencionado, ¿no? Es que en la diáspora llegaba mucha información que acá, pues, estaban ocurriendo las cosas, pero que por la misma comunicación no se veía tanto. Y una de las cosas que más me impactaba era cómo Facebook se convirtió como un tipo de como live journal o como una libreta, ¿no? Así de experiencias, ¿no? Como personas diciendo, llevo 6 horas aquí esperando en esta fila para la gasolina y voy a tener que dormirme en el carro esta noche. O, en este caso tenía una amiga que recurrentemente hablaba de querer matarse, ¿no? Y no sabía cómo responder a eso, porque en realidad soy emocional, pero no siempre soy la mejor consolando a la gente, especialmente de lejos. Siento que tampoco entendía qué tipo de consolación yo podía darle a alguien. Sentía que era vacío, ¿no? Que era como, ¿qué yo le digo a alguien ante esto, no? Como, en verdad está cabrón, mano, ¿sabes? Yo entiendo. Yo no tengo nada que ofrecer ahí, yo no tengo nada que decir ante eso. Pero sí quería decir como que te veo y está cabrón.
¿Y sabes si la amiga ha leído el poema?
Yo se lo leí en privado. Ella sabe que existe. Me lo agradeció y nos sentamos como una escalera y se lo leí.
Y el otro poema que sale aquí es del terciario, ¿verdad?
No, el
No.
otro poema que sale ahí es de...
Sin vergüenza, sin
Es de
nación.
Antes que Islas Volcán.
Ah, ¿verdad? Ujú.
Originalmente me lo pidió Cindy Jiménez Vera, la editora, como un libro para niños. Y dije, mira, yo como que no sé, soy buena escribiendo libros para niños. Pero puedo hacer como un 13 para arriba, como jóvenes entrando a la tragedia de la adultez. Y en realidad lo que salió era este libro sobre el futuro, ¿no? Y la posibilidad de pensar el futuro. Y tengo tantos poemarios tan deprimentes que como que tan tropy darks, ¿no? Que me puse como mente a escribir un poemario sobre el futuro. Y lo que más encontré como en ese proceso era que estamos creando futuro a cada rato en Puerto Rico, ¿no? Pero que nos enseñan, ¿no? Pero sí el colonialismo como que refuerza los momentos de competencia y de falta de solidaridad y poca solidaridad, ¿no? Y pocas veces refuerza los momentos en que hacemos cosas bien cabronas. Y también que está bien fallar y está bien como cagarla cuando uno está traumado. No, yo lo pienso también como ser queer, como para las personas queer no hay una guía para cómo formar familia o cómo tener relaciones. Como una de las primeras cosas que yo aprendí como cuando empecé a salir con mujeres era que yo no soy una mujer, pero sí en ese entonces me identificaba como mujer y como lesbiana. Y me di cuenta que tenía que inventarme una forma de acercarme a otra mujer, porque no existía en mi vocabulario eso, no existía en mi vocabulario afectivo ni social eso. Y que las personas queer a cada rato nos inventamos cosas, nos inventamos género, nos inventamos expresiones de género, tenemos que inventarnos un mundo. Y que dentro de eso metemos la pata todo el tiempo, ¿no? Creo que un poquito así es como los puertorriqueños hemos ido creando solidaridad, ¿no? A pesar del imperialismo, el colonialismo y todo, como nadie nos enseñó a unirnos, como eso lo hicimos nosotros y lo hacemos mal muchas veces y otras veces lo hacemos bien cabrón, pero lo hacemos nosotros.
amazing film. Before we ask you to come back, Yarmar and Francis, I want to introduce somebody who's made tonight possible and all of the incredible support the City University provides to Puerto Rico and to our incredible scholars like Yarmar. Our Chancellor, Felo Matos Rodriguez, where is he? And Felo, if you're inspired, Felo, as everyone here I think knows, made El Centro possible, created the incredible research support there as it continues to flourish at Hunter. And so if you're moved, Felo, you please come and join us. And I want to bring up to the podium one of CUNY's wonderful trustees, Lorraine Cortez Vasquez. Where's Lorraine to say a few words? Lorraine has done so much in so many capacities as a nonprofit leader, a government leader, and was somebody who took the organization of Aspira and brought it into great impact throughout this city and this state and creating young lives and really living what we say is the Hunter motto, the care of the future is mine. And Lorraine, I think, knows that Antonia Pantoja, who created Aspira, was herself a Hunter girl. So Lorraine, please come up. And as Lorraine's coming up, there's an old maxim that you can always tell, Lorraine is a Hunter alum, and there's an old maxim that you could always tell a Hunter girl and you can't tell her much. And Lorraine loved that saying so much she made me put it on a T-shirt, and it is our highest selling alumni item. So, Lorraine Cortez Vasquez, a great city.
I'm so glad that I'm able to say a few words after the video. Thank you. Thank you for documenting that. But what makes me proud as a Puerto Riqueña, as a New Yorker, as a trustee, is the amount of support and resources that New York City has rendered to Puerto Rico throughout. First of all, as CUNY, we sent 200 students over the last 2 years to help and restore roofs, all of the blue tarps that we could convert from blue tarps to roofs, and some of the internal painting, all by the giving, the loving commitment of our students under our CUNY Serve program. It is amazing. It was arduous work. It was 90-degree weather, and I've never seen young people and young adults so happy because they were giving. Some of them took their stipend, which we gave them this meager stipend, and it was mostly for their living expenses there. Some of them shared their stipend with the families that they were helping. That's CUNY. That's New Yorkers giving back. So that's one of the things I'm very proud of. And then as an official of New York, we're extremely proud. After Maria, we sent the first responders to Puerto Rico, who stayed there and created the first disaster command center for the town of San Juan. And we also then deployed people for many, many months there. And immediately after the first earthquake, we sent over 60 first responders and building inspectors to look at some of the buildings in the small towns, all of the small towns in the South that were affected. And we're really proud of that. And just 2 days ago, we sent 24 social workers to go to provide some mental health services. And those of you who know what's going on in Puerto Rico, the mental health needs and the post-trauma stress is enormous since Maria. Francis has written about this. Many people have written about this. This continues today. And if you can imagine you being 5, 6, 8 days of aftershocks, it's unheard of. And so the trauma that people are experiencing, so I'm very proud that we were able to do that. But the thing that I'm most proud of as a Puerto Riqueña is, one, being Puerto Riqueña. But the other thing is the resiliency and the capacity and the power and the strength of the Puerto Rican community. And through disaster, we have been able to see a unification between the diaspora and Puerto Rico that I had in all of the years I've been here. My family came here in the 1920s. in all of the years that I've never seen that kind of collective, una patria extendida, really seeing ourselves as one nation and one people, just housed in different places. And that's the power of the constant work that's being done by the journalists, by people like Anita, by these films, by the CUNY students. That's the power. And what I ask each and every one of you in this audience is to make sure that you use your voices to ensure that Puerto Rico is not forgotten. Puerto Ricanos here and in the island obviously never forget Puerto Rico. But we need you, our trusted allies who are not Puerto Rican, to raise your voices and say, basta ya, these are American citizens. If you look at the number of Purple Hearts, we have some of the highest military honors. So we give our life for this country. We expect the citizens to have this country respect us and respond to us. So that's what I ask each of you. Enjoy the night. Thank you for being here. But I will tell you, without your voices, without your support, Puerto Rico will survive. Puerto Ricans, you saw how we overturned the government in a peaceful demonstration with music and dance. And that is the revolution that I want to be part of. But we need your continued support so that we could make sure that the resiliency continues. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our CUNY trustee and extraordinary commissioner of aging, and then to our true hero, who the person who's made CUNY such a support to the island of Puerto Rico, Bela Matos Rodriguez Achenko.
Thank you, President Raab, and I wanted to sneak in the back and participate, but I guess that's not something that I can do. I think that I echo the words of our trustee, Cortez Vasquez, not just speaking on behalf of the City University of New York, but of the work that all New Yorkers and all Puerto Ricans who are here in New York feel about the situation in the island. I'm really, really proud of the work that we've been doing at the City University in our work with Puerto Rico, and work that would need to continue, as we all know, and committed to that work. And great to have presidents like President Raab, who are also very quick to respond and be supportive of all those efforts. So thank you, Jennifer, for that and for all you do. And when you care about something, sometimes the best thing you can do is to listen and to learn, and that's what I came here to do. We want to listen to Yarimar and to Frances, so the show is yours. Thank you very much.
What a terrific crowd. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you for inviting me here to discuss your book. And of course, my first question is the question that everybody has on their mind regarding the omniscient power that you have in their title of your book. So the big question is, are you a bruja or what?
No, and I've been asked that a lot. I think I'm just a good Caribbeanist. When we put together Aftershocks of Disaster, I had the Haitian earthquake very much on my mind, something that I had studied a lot, had been very personally impacted by. I lost one of my research assistants to the Haitian earthquake, and my mentor was Michel Roth-Trio, a prominent Haitian scholar. So my very understanding of disasters was shaped by the Caribbean experience, and particularly by that earthquake. And immediately I had in mind, first of all, I saw a repetition of so many of the problems that we saw in Katrina, in Haiti, and other places. So that there was, I already had a lot of conceptual tools for thinking about this. And so what we propose is that, in fact, all disasters can be thought of through the language of earthquakes in terms of thinking about aftershocks, about how, a lot of people in Puerto Rico, those who lost their lives, the great majority did not lose it to the storm. They lost it to the infrastructural aftershocks, to the political aftershocks. So we wanted to think broadly about that. And it's hard to say how I feel about its applicability to the current moment. It's not something that I'm in any way happy about, but I think
I wondered that. I wondered if you would have changed it, if you had known, if you would have put a different name.
No. I think it's a useful way of thinking about it. Also, because of the language of shock too, and the shock trauma, and the different shocks that Puerto Ricans have experienced. And part of what we want to leave open to the readers is to decide what is the main shock and what is the aftershock. Is Maria really the aftershock, or was the stage already set for Maria to be what it was?
Interesting. Now, I think your official title is you told me you're a political anthropologist, and so those of us who are not in that field, you think of Margaret Mead, right? You think of somebody in somebody else's country. What's it like to be an anthropologist in your own place? Is it different for you?
I think, again, being a good Caribbeanist and having done a lot of my initial work in the French Caribbean, I think that really helped me place Puerto Rico in a broader context. And a lot of Puerto Rican scholars, they like to talk about Puerto Rico as the last colony, the only colony, the forgotten colony, like all this kind of exceptionalism around Puerto Rico. And the work that I always try to do is building on this phrase within anthropology of making the strange familiar and the familiar strange. I want to kind of place Puerto Rico within a kind of familiar landscape of post-colonial problems, of relationships of inequality, of also the struggles among minorities in the U.S., and to kind of decenter the ways in which we tend to think about Puerto Rico.
Well, okay, so now you also lived in other places besides Puerto Rico. You lived in, I think, Topeka, Kansas, and I forget where else. So how does that inform your thinking? Does it make you an outsider, or are you always going to consider yourself an insider?
Yeah, I had a short stint as a Kansas Rican.
It doesn't have the same ring to it.
But I think I have a monthly column in the Puerto Rican newspaper called En Vaivén, which is like coming and going. And I think that really defines my positionality. I was born in Puerto Rico, moved to Kansas when I was 5, then lived in Arizona briefly, then went back to Puerto Rico to finish grade school and college, and then grad school, off to the French Caribbean to do work, and now coming back. And so I think that places me in a unique position where when I say us or we, it's unclear if I mean the diaspora, if I mean New Yorkers, Kansas Ricans, or San Juan Ricans. And I think a lot of folks in the diaspora, they have, they feel some kind of way about talking about Puerto Rico and the island. And I think having gone to school there, being a product of public education in Puerto Rico, I feel, that I can speak as a Puerto Rican from the island, but then also now I do feel like I'm part of the diaspora. And so to have a kind of empathy and an understanding of the sensibility of both of those positions and the fraught relationships that sometimes exist among those communities, I think gives me a particular vantage point.
Yeah, every time I called you this summer, I could practically hear the roaring in the background of like pots and pans and whatever protests you were at. And I couldn't tell whether you were protesting or whether you were researching.
Does it have to be one or the other? I did have a moment when I was tweeting and live streaming some of the protests, and at one point I said, you know what, done. I put everything off and I tweeted, find another live stream, I'm gonna enjoy this. And I let myself, join into the chants, because that's what anthropologists do, is participant observation. So I wanted to feel what it was like to topple the governor,
I mean, for me, I guess I'm a New Yorker. I grew up here in New York City, and I've covered huge protests in many places around the world. I've seen highways filled with protesters, but it was really different to see a highway full of protesters in Puerto Rico. It was a moment that you can't even explain. And I guess I'm wondering, were there moments that surprised you? Was it just the whole thing, or was there a special moment that you recall?
The whole thing surprised me. I was actually in New York setting up my apartment, getting ready to start my new job as a Hunter College faculty member when the chat first leaked, and there was the big information drop. And my first reaction was like, who wants to read all that? I thought it was so long. I had never imagined that people would do this collective reading of all these pages of.
Did you read it all?
I did read it all, but only after I saw that everyone else was reading it, honestly, because I was busy with paint samples and setting up my apartment. And then my friends in Puerto Rico, especially journalists like Benjamin Torres Gotay, they said, Yarimar, you need to get here or you're going to miss this historic moment. So, it's thanks to my friends that they helped me tune into the importance of this moment. And then once I was there, I think no one can say that they predicted that they knew it was going to happen, because it caught everyone by surprise, even those who were involved. And the first couple of days, it was just this beautiful encounter that people had on the street, discovering each other, seeing each other come out for this, and surprising ourselves with what we could do. As Raquel Salas Rivera says in the film, we're not taught to come together. We're not taught to engage in these kinds of activities, and we're often told that we can't. And so I think, everyone was surprised in a wonderful way about what it was and what it turned into.
I wonder, is it a fleeting moment, or is this the new Puerto Rico?
Well, so a couple of months ago, I would go to Puerto Rico on the radio. Everyone would ask me that, and that was the question also for the end of the year for all the columnists and in the Nuevo Dia. Was this just a moment and now it's gone? And I think at that point, everyone was very hesitant and trying to spin some kind of answer, because the truth is that we didn't know. But I think that the recent events after the earthquake have shown that it wasn't a fleeting moment, that people are empowered. I had said, I feel like people have kept their little protest kits. I had people tell me, I have my protest kit in the car, which was like a pot and a kerchief to cover up in case gas, tear gas, etc. And people whipped out those protest kits when all the scandal, was leaked about the withheld aid. So, and now people are calling for the governor's resignation. Again, there's a big protest on Friday. So I think that it was definitely a transformative event that has changed history.
So I guess I wonder, especially now that there's another round of protests about the current governor, what do they want? What's the end game?
I think the thing is that the end game is to change everything. And so that takes time. When you see people have these checklists of all the people they want out of power and all the things they want transformed.
Am I on that list?
Haven't seen you yet. Yeah, I'll let you know. But aside from politicians, there's also the Fiscal Control Board, the debt, rethinking Puerto Rico's relationship to the United States. It's a very long task list, so that's not going to get done in a day or in a week, in a year, in an electoral cycle even. But I think, that there is a long-term vision, and what's most important about this summer is that people recognize their political capacity, and that's amazing in a place where people were always told that they couldn't do this, So now, an empowered Puerto Rican, that's really something to be afraid of.
I bet. And empowered women at that, no? Talk a little bit about that, the role that women played in this summer's protest.
Yeah, well, the big march that everyone, that drew everyone's attention with Residente and Bad Bunny, that march was organized by the Colectiva Feminista, and it has been women, older folks, a lot of queer folks too. Queer communities have been front and center, especially in this new wave of protests. So all of these kind of perhaps marginalized populations are certainly not what you imagine as the political hero, because there's this idea that, we need a big leader that's usually a charismatic male figure. That hasn't been who's been at the front of this, and so I think that that's also really important to think about what that means for our way of doing politics.
But does there need to be a person? Does there need to be a figure? Because there are elections, you need candidates.
Yeah, that's the thing. People say, this was a leaderless movement. But I always say it was a leaderful movement. There were all these different leaders that emerged and in many ways grew through the kind of resilience that was developed through Maria. A lot of people in Puerto Rico think resilience is a bad word, the R word. But there are good aspects to that. And in lots of ways, the state abandoned citizens, forced them to become resilient. And that resilience, I think, worked against them. I had people tell me, after Maria, I discovered we don't need the government. So that's what made people unafraid to topple Ricardo Rosselló. In Puerto Rico, people have always said, the devil is better than the one you don't, right? And so there was a real fear of the unknown, and to say, no, get rid of him, even though we don't know what will come next. I think that, that took seeing how little difference he made in those moments of crisis.
One of the things that I did this afternoon was that I posted on Twitter that I was going to be here talking to you, and I asked people for questions. And so we actually got a couple of really smart ones, and one person asked a question that goes right into what you were just saying. Because given everything that's happened to create and confirm distrust, are mainstream politicians, other than Manuel Natal, or non-mainstream politicians, other than Manuel Natal, are parties going to make headway, or should we expect the continued PNP, PPD dichotomy? Meaning of the same old characters
I
going
think,
to
you
win the
know,
election.
the problem right now is that there's a kind of lag between, you know, what people desire and the options that they have in front of them. So I know that a lot of people, they want to see radical change. They want to see, you know, they want to get rid of the political parties. And some folks who are calling for the protests to die down, they're saying, no, forget about protests. We're going to clean house in the elections. And people are saying, clean house with what? You know, what do we have? You know, what are the candidates that we have? Yeah. So I think it's going to take a long time. I do think we're definitely going to see different voting patterns in the past, and I mean the way past. You know, Puerto Ricans used to just vote, rajar la papeleta, you know, just put an X under a party symbol. And more, I was already discovering this in the work that I was doing before Maria about how people were educating themselves and saying that they wanted to do an intelligent vote and a mixed vote and to, you know, search for candidates across the ballot. That was already happening. And I think in this election coming up, we're going to see more of that. You know, people are not going to be able to elect the real politicians that they want because those politicians are not yet really on the landscape.
Right. Are there new faces? Is anybody putting their hand up and saying, okay, I'm going to put down my pot, but instead I'm going to run for office?
There are some people with the Victoria Ciudadana movement. There are people who are, you know, trying to do that. Many of them are stepping into smaller roles, municipal legislation, etc. But you know, the big offices, the governor, the resident commissioner, it's mostly people who have run before. It's a lot of recycled politicians. Right. And so, but I think, you know, even already in the last elections, people were saying, what do those roles even matter when you have a fiscal control board that doesn't allow the governor to make decisions, you know, when the person who's in Congress has no vote, you know? So I think that people are finding, you know, that those big roles are somewhat empty and symbolic, and that maybe it's either in these smaller offices, but also in community organizations and in other forms of civic society that politics is really happening.
Now, one of the best things to come out of the protests were the memes, you know, so you really had to hand it to the Puerto Ricans that they embraced humor in the middle of so much, I don't know if tragedy is the right word, but so much political turmoil. I know that you're working, I don't know if you're allowed, how much you want to say about it, but tell us a little bit about that.
So the next book I'm doing, just a kind of short little vanity project, is a story of the summer protest told through memes. So I'm working with a local artist in Puerto Rico, Sofia Gallisa Muriente, who's been tracking memes for a long time. And we want to really look at these memes. I have a lot of theories about why Puerto Ricans are so good at memes, you know, and what they mean, and also the importance of memes as a kind of democratized editorial cartoon, and what they reveal about the situation. So I'm hoping to produce this kind of little fun text, but also to at the same time take memes and other forms of cultural production really seriously. That's part of what the anthropologist does, you know, not just focusing on speeches, but looking also at graffiti, T-shirts, memes, etc.
So what's your favorite one?
Oh, there's so many, but I think one that I really love is there was this scandal about the orange traffic cone thing, not cones, but the whatever barrels, that they discovered the government was buying them for $500 each, and they were like $100 at Walmart or something. Mm-hmm. And there were, for some reason, you can never tell what's going to capture the imagination. So there were a lot of memes about that, and my favorite one was where it represented your salary, and it had like 3 cones, and then it had the salary of the head of the fiscal control board, and it was like a wall of cones.
That's a good one. Now, and you just came back from Puerto Rico, so tell us a little bit about that. I mean, you know, Puerto Rico can't catch a break, so I'm kind of wondering whether are the people finally reaching a mental breaking point?
I've heard specialists say that Puerto Ricans are going through extreme, severe, chronic, traumatic, like it's just kind of every single adjective for the kind of trauma that they've experienced. And I'm honestly really worried about that. I mean, researchers who looked at the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, they talked about what they called Katrina brain, this kind of cognitive effects that extreme, trauma can have on people. And so I think a lot of folks are at the breaking point. We see it in the camps, the camps that have emerged after the earthquake, where every day since the end of December, there are constant earthquakes coming through. And, there's this uncertainty about what's going to happen next. People who have lost their entire homes and don't know, how they're going to rebuild or where. But I think this idea that they can't catch a break, I think it leaves it too much up to chance and fortune. And I think it's we need to think about this kind of systematic, trauma that is not just the luck of the
It wasn't
draw.
just weather.
Yeah.
Interesting. And I guess I'm wondering, you mentioned Katrina. One of the biggest impacts that Katrina had in New Orleans was population decline. So, you have a place that's already been dropping. The population has already been dropping since 2006, and then again in 2017 with the hurricane. Are we about to see another wave of outmigration?
So a lot of the people that I've been interviewing in the camps, they don't want to move to San Juan. They don't want to move to another part of Puerto Rico. They're coming to the U.S. And a big part of that is schools. I mean, the schools are closed in the South. Some crumbled in the earthquake. There's no real plan for how these students are going to be relocated. There are towns where there now is just no school to go to. And the government is not giving a clear pathway of how that's going to be dealt with. So a lot of people, thinking about their kids are bringing them to the United States and enrolling them here. So I do think that's going to happen. And just in general, the current hashtag, aside from calling for Wanda to resign, is hashtag Estado Genocida, genocidal state, because I think that for over a decade, the state has made it really hard to live in Puerto Rico through either enforcing migration, displacement through gentrification, dumping toxic coal ash, not helping people rebuild. And so I think that, people are trying to figure out how to live in this context.
So if you have so many middle-class people leaving, and then you have all these very rich upper-class people coming, what is Puerto Rico going to look like 50 years from now?
Hawaii? I don't know. It's a question. It's a question, and one that haunts a lot of people, and that they're trying to figure out how to deal with all of that.
One thing that I think is really interesting, and I don't remember who it is that talks about it in your book, is you hear a lot, like my colleagues in the media, particularly white liberal television journalists, that want to feel always the need to remind people, 3 billion American citizens, this is an outrage, as if that's the only reason that you should be upset. Like, which I don't think they realize how offensive that is to a lot of people. I don't know, do you think it's offensive?
Well, I have a pinned tweet on my Twitter account that every once in a while gets some reactions where I say, "Dear allies, when feeling the need to remind everyone that Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens, ask yourself if what you really need to remind folks is that the U.S. is an empire." And so I think that assertion that Puerto Ricans are citizens, as if it should surprise us that they're treated this way, silences the history of empire and the fact that there are unequal citizenships, and that in many ways Puerto Rican citizenship is working exactly as it was designed to operate, as a kind of way of including people to a certain extent, but keeping them excluded. Puerto Rico from the beginning was brought into the Federation, was not brought into the Federation of States, but brought in as a territory, as a possession, and not placed on the path of statehood, or also not given the chance to have self-government. So I think that, when folks assert the citizenship, on the one hand, it is offensive to those who feel that it is a non-consensual citizenship that they never really asked for. And I think it's also offensive to those who feel that the problems of that citizenship and its incompleteness are never recognized.
I had a debate this week with my editor. I guess 100 and whatever many years into this relationship with Puerto Rico, the New York Times, we still haven't quite figured out what we're going to call Puerto Rico. Commonwealth, territory, I hate the word Commonwealth because I don't know what it means. You know, like Massachusetts is a Commonwealth. So if Massachusetts and Puerto Rico are both Commonwealths, then what is a Commonwealth? I should probably know the answer to that. Is this being streamed? No. Okay. What words do you hate, and what words do you use?
I use a controversial word. I do use the word territory, and I know that some people don't like that because it refers, the folks who don't like it feel that it refers to Puerto Rico as a piece of land, and it kind of, includes the residents that live there. Some people prefer nation, other people prefer colony, but I like to use territory precisely because it grates, and because it is, what it is, and so I want that grating feeling, I don't want to smooth it over with a euphemism like Commonwealth, which was created precisely to occlude the colonial relationship.
Is using the word colony like picking sides? You know what I mean? Are you establishing yourself as a member of the statehood party if you use that word?
Well, interesting, and this is what I was writing about before Maria. I had, other things. It used to be that only people in the independence movement would refer to it as a colony, but part of what I was looking at was the shifts in political attitudes in Puerto Rico, and in 2016, I did a survey asking people, do you think Puerto Rico is a colony? And increasingly, more and more folks were saying yes, and on all sides of the political aisle. And in 2016, it was the first time also that in the gubernatorial debates, the gubernatorial candidates were asked not if they thought Puerto Rico was a colony, but how they were going to deal with Puerto Rico's colonial status. And I think that since the debt crisis and the imposition of the Ley Promesa and the Fiscal Control Board, where the United States stated clearly and openly that it reversed its previous position and that Puerto Ricans did not have sovereignty, that sovereignty resides with Congress, Puerto Rico's colonial status is no longer really a debate. It's now an objective fact.
I saw an interesting debate on Twitter the other day about do Puerto Ricans consider themselves Americans? I thought no. I'm curious to know what you think.
Well, I always tweak that and say Puerto Ricans do not consider themselves United Statesians, right? Estadounidenses. America is a broad term that, people like Jose Marti and others have tried to use to think about, the hemisphere as a whole. And so I think there is a sense of America-ness, But, I have a lot of friends who say that Puerto Ricans, they're just colonial subjects with passports, So there are a lot of complicated relationships to that U.S. identity.
Now, going back to our friends on Twitter, somebody had a good question for you. And let me see if I can even make out my own handwriting. It said, you and other Puerto Rican scholars are deeply critical of colonial status and deeply skeptical of the possibility, advisability of statehood, but you stop short of advocating for independence. Can you reflect on the practical consequences of that reluctance?
That question really killed me with the practical consequences.
I know, right? That's what I thought. I almost didn't copy it, and I said no, but then they're going to accuse me of shortening their question.
I felt like they were like, we see you, don't give me that academic, theoretical answer. But I will start with the academic theoretical answer and maybe make my way to the practical consequences. I think as someone who has studied different political formulas in the Caribbean, I don't feel like I can advocate for any of the ones that are presented as options to Puerto Ricans on the ballot. Independence in the Caribbean often means indebtment to the IMF, structural adjustment, an equally large diaspora and problems of migration. It doesn't necessarily solve the problems that Puerto Ricans have, and in many ways the protests that we see in Puerto Rico are very similar to the ones that we see in Haiti and Jamaica, etc. So I think, what we need to do is to decolonize decolonization, because the way in which,
What does that mean?
Well, the way in which former colonies were ushered into independence was in ways that would maintain their economic dependency, their political impotence, their inability to really set the terms of life in their territories. So I have a hard time advocating for that. At the same time, having studied the French Caribbean, which became a full department of France, in which the towering figure of Aimé Césaire, tried to develop this idea of incorporation into France in a way that would decolonize not just Guadeloupe and Martinique, but also France itself into a post-colonial nation. And that failed. They still feel that they have a colonial relationship. So it's really difficult for me to advocate for statehood as if, becoming the 51st state, getting an extra star on the flag, which, don't freak out, people have designed a very nice version of it that looks nice. I don't think that's going to really solve the colonial structures, that make citizenship incomplete, not just for Puerto Rican citizens, but also for African Americans and Latinos here in the mainland. So I think, and there's no way I can continue to advocate for the current status, which we know has led to a kind of bankrupt colonial situation. So I think that what we need to do is to think together with Latinos in the U.S., minorities in the U.S., our Caribbean neighbors, to reimagine what our shared problems are and how we can think about those collectively. I don't think that's going to be solved through a vote in a plebiscite over political status.
And are you alone in that kind of opinion? Or do most scholars in Puerto Rico feel like they have to pick a side?
I think it's, I don't know if they feel like they have to pick a side, but it's definitely a minefield. And if you don't pick a side, sometimes a side will be picked for you. And I guess maybe that gets to the practical consequences of the question, which I really appreciated that question. And maybe I haven't thought enough about it, but part of what I try to do is, I'm a public scholar, I write in the newspaper. I think it's really important for me to treat respectfully every political option. And what I always try to do also is to move away from this representation of Puerto Ricans as not knowing what they want and as being incoherent, because that's what often U.S. politicians will say. They'll say, oh, I support self-determination, whatever Puerto Ricans want. And they're kind of banking on that continued division within Puerto Rico itself. And so what I try to focus on is on our shared grievances and how, in many ways, pro-independence people, pro-statehood people, and pro-Commonwealth people, they're all angry about the same thing. They're all in agreement about the problems. They're just not in agreement about the solutions. And so I think trying to not take a side and to rather be empathetic with each political option and try to understand what leads people in a shared context to imagine very different ways out of that context, I think is really important.
So do you predict that Puerto Rico will or will not be the 51st state?
I do not make predictions. Yeah.
One debate that I had with my editor about 5 million times last year and the year before was when the government of Puerto Rico kept on insisting that the number of dead was 64, or that, maybe it's a little higher than 64. My editor kept on saying, but I don't understand. Wouldn't they exaggerate the number of dead so that they can get more federal aid? What is this about? What is this about? Why this resistance? And I always felt that it came down to statehood. That, Ricky Rosselló didn't want to look like, the person who, what was that? Wasn't there something in the chat? Así no se pide estadidad, right? Like you can't become a state like that. Do you agree, or why do you think? What was that about?
the right before the earthquakes, the last television series I saw before that was Chernobyl on HBO, and it prepared me very well for dealing with the frustrations with the state and to not think that it's just about Ricardo Rosselló or the PNP or Puerto Rico or Trump or any of it. I think there's something in the nature of statecraft, of trying to occlude the failures, of denying, what's right in front of you. And so as I watched that movie and how they tried to cover up the impact of the explosion, to deny the fact that it would kill as many people as it did, or have the health consequences that it did, to the very end. I think that it's something about the very nature of states trying to protect themselves. And so I want to think that it's not particular to Puerto Rico, although at the same time there is always the kind of burden of colonialism of trying to, present yourself in the best light to the imperial center.
I thought there was a very interesting point made in one of the essays in your book. I believe it was Hilda Llorens. She talked about climate change refugees, and that she really finds that offensive too. That the little brown person running from the rain or whatever. Talk to me about that. Do you think that that's an offensive imagery?
Well, I think a lot of folks wrote about this also in relationship to Katrina, when the folks who were leaving New Orleans were also depicted as refugees. There's this idea of a refugee being someone that you have a choice to take in or not, that doesn't necessarily have a right to be there, and that by bringing them in, it's an act of charity. And so I think that, that is certainly happening. And at the same time, the idea of climate refugees in particular suggests that there are these, untemperate zones, and that it aligns in a very problematic way with the global South, and so I think her piece really, is provocative and forces us to think carefully about the labels that we use to talk about these folks. And, right now, the folks that are living in camps in tent cities in Puerto Rico, in lots of ways, the government is again treating them as people who are being extended charity rather than as citizens that have rights that the state needs to be accountable to, and they need to provide them something more than a leaky tarp, in a flood zone, which is where many of these camps are.
I want to make sure that I get through all the Twitter people. I should have written down their names. This is a really good question. Why do so many Boricuas support Donald Trump? Person says 30 to 40% is a lot. It's not, it's not a majority, but it's a lot for a president who insulted Puerto Ricans, delayed disaster response, and continues to withhold federal hurricane recovery. I mean, I don't know if that, first of all, I don't even know if that 30, 40% number is accurate.
Yeah,
I don't know. This is a Twitter number.
Well, so before Maria, when Trump was still a candidate and elected, I was interviewing people about him, and they said that he was, for the very similar reasons to why people in the U.S. supported him. They thought he was an outsider, that he was a maverick, that he might do things differently, and they had a hope that he might even be willing to be crazy and do something different with Puerto Rico. And, when he first arrived, I always like to remind people, when he first arrived in Puerto Rico after the storm, he's like, well, this debt isn't going to get paid. That was the first thing he said, and so I think people thought that he might be willing to do some, take some unpopular positions in relationship to Puerto Rico's political relationship to the United States as a kind of out-of-the-box thinker.
Do you think that too much of the media coverage is through that lens of the, what does Donald Trump have to say?
Absolutely, but at the same time, I say that sometimes the best thing that happened to Puerto Rico was for Trump to throw paper towels at us because it brought media attention to a story that was not being covered. I mean, right now, there is an earthquake swarm in Puerto Rico that every day people are facing, repeated earthquakes, and a place that still has not recovered from its massive hurricane. And it's not being covered very much. If this was happening anywhere in the United States, all the major news would be there, et cetera. And I think it's not being covered because Trump hasn't insulted us. He hasn't, called Yulin names or done any of the things that he did then that, the studies showed gave a huge spike in media coverage. And, folks in the book talk about the problems and then the politics of this media coverage and of representation. But the silence around Puerto Rico is not healthy either. And I think that's what is most needed when people talk to me about where should I donate and what should I do. I always say I think the most important thing is to educate yourself about Puerto Rico, because a lot of the things that happen because no one really understands the political relationship and are not going to hold U.S. politicians accountable for how they treat the island.
Well, that's funny because the next Twitter question is, can Puerto Ricans on the island sue the federal government or local government for the continued debacle and differential treatment versus other states affected by disaster?
They can, and they are. There are people preparing a class action lawsuit against FEMA for its disproportionate denial of aid and disproportionate lack of appeals. And there are also folks who used to live in the 50 states. There's one case in particular of someone who used to live in the 50 states, moved back to Puerto Rico and lost some of his Social Security benefits, et cetera. And he's doing a lawsuit again for discrimination. Initially, the official ruling was that it was not discrimination because they were not discriminating against people in Puerto Rico, but because anyone in Puerto Rico who moves to the U.S. gets all their full benefits. They can vote for the president. They can do all that. So it's really nothing against people, but against residents of a place. But then other people say, well, who disproportionately lives in this place? So there are these lawsuits ongoing that will be interesting to see the results of.
Somebody else had an interesting question that I like the framing of it. It said, how can we cope with so much migration in the midst of all these tragedies?
I didn't see that one. I don't know if by we they meant people in the island or.
Oh, that's a really good question. I assumed on the island, but you're right. Maybe they meant Orlando. Like help.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I think the thing is that the idea of that was another question that I had done in the survey of 2016. I asked people, have you contemplated migration? And about 85% of people had contemplated migration. It's this constant, thing that people have in their minds. And so, there have been these campaigns of yo no me quito, like I'm not going to give up, I'm not going to quit, I'm not going to migrate. It's almost like a political stance. And at the same time, you read on Facebook and you see so many people talking about saying goodbye. And one of the photos that Erika Rodriguez has in the book is of people waving goodbye at the airport. So, the way in which that displacement runs through our history, and makes us in lots of ways, it makes us what we are. It makes us this trans nation. It connects us to these different communities, but it's also a profound scar that we have.
So who's left behind? The very poor and the very old?
Especially the very old. In the neighborhood where my mom and my grandma live, and where I stay when I visit, it's all these older folks, retired, whose children have moved on to the United States. A lot of women who have who have lost their husbands, who are widows. And it's heartbreaking to see them. During Maria, my next door neighbor, she burned herself with a kerosene lamp. She's about 70 years old. And so to see these people in this kind of infrastructural violence that they're facing, it's very hard. It's very hard. And so that is a question that a lot of people ask. And Erika Rodriguez's portrait, where she says this is a portrait of a nation, and it's an aging nation with little resources. I think that's what a lot of us fear Puerto Rico is becoming.
So by the way, most of the photos that are in your book of Erica's were with my stories. So I could narrate each one. The one where the photo of the people waiting for ICE that you showed during your clip, that was about 3 o'clock in the morning in Ponce, and the people had arrived in line. I went to the first person in line to see what time. The place doesn't open until 7 a.m., so what time do the people start? And it was 11 p.m., so that's what time the people had started to get 2 bags of ice. And I just thought, wow, I just couldn't imagine myself making camp at an ice factory all night long. But anyway, I should probably open it up to the floor. I don't know, does somebody have a microphone that they want to be? Are we ready to take questions from the floor? Yeah, I think so. There's somebody there in the back.
Question about the statehood status. I know that going back to 67, there were many referendums where there was overwhelming opposition to becoming a state, and the people of Puerto Rico voted it down. And then most recently, there was an overwhelming vote to become a state. So my question is, why was there so much opposition before, and what is the game changer that most recently shifted?
First of all, it was a boycotted. I'm not even going to let her answer that question, because I know most people boycotted the vote. So, the people who did not boycott the vote were the people who voted for statehood. So that was simply a reflection of who went to the polls. So, and then in general, you almost have to take whatever results they come up with and ignore them, because the one before that in 2012, it was a 2-part question. Do you agree that we need to change, or whatever? I don't remember what the first question was. And then the second question is like, okay, well, so what do you think that we should be? And then most of the people who support the current status boycotted the second question. So then they eliminated them in the percentage of the results. So it's basically like a numbers game. I don't know if you agree, Yarimar.
Yeah, no, the last plebiscite, it's just, there's nothing we can do with those numbers, they don't really say much. But there has been a consistent tendency in the ones before that for there to be a strong block of about 45% of people who do support statehood. And, we'll see, I'm doing my survey again in November to see how political attitudes have changed over this electoral term. But in terms of your question of why people opposed it so much beforehand, I think it's because people felt that they were not United Statesians. You know, they felt that we had a different culture, a different language, that we had a different history, and that we've been treated like a colonial property, you know, been used as a testing ground for military warfare, for medical experimentation, not given the full rights of citizenship. So there are a lot of people who don't, you know, they don't feel patriotic about the United States. Although there are others who do feel American, who have served in wars, and have some sort of connection, have lived in the United States, feel connection to U.S. communities. So it does vary, but I think what is consistent is, and even in that tampered plebiscite, or not tampered, but mishandled plebiscite, the first question of do you want the territorial status of Puerto Rico to change, there was a majority of vote that yes, they did. You know, I think people are unhappy with the current status. That I don't think is a big debate.
And is it still split? I mean, it used to be like, 48% versus 48%.
Yes, although within the people who don't want statehood, there are a lot of splinters. So there are people who want independence, and then there are people who want to be an associated republic, to have a relationship that other places have, like Palau, et cetera, where they have a certain degree of sovereignty and independence, but a relationship that recognizes the historical ties to the United States, the large Puerto Rican communities in the U.S., the legacies of fighting in wars, et cetera, and all that, Puerto Ricans have given to the United States. And that preserves citizenship, which is also a right to mobility, and the ability that Puerto Ricans have to, travel on a U.S. passport. So, those are different things that even within the folks who don't want statehood, there's a lot of debate about what a different kind of relationship to the U.S. that maintained some ties but had greater sovereignty, and that something that for locals didn't feel like colonialism. And I think that the problem is that we have to invent that. As Raquel Salas Rivera says in the film, that's something we have to create. And I love the way she connects being queer with being this kind of queer polity, that has not been taught how to act, how to engage on the world stage. And so we need to define what that means for us. Given this relationship that we've had to the United States, that there are more Puerto Ricans in the U.S. than there are on the island, but that we still don't feel fully American. What political relationship would make sense to us? What would that look like? And it doesn't exist. We have to invent it, right? And as she says, in inventing it, we're going to mess up a lot along the way.
I don't think she didn't use the word mess up. 2 more questions, okay. There's somebody here?
Hello. Well, good evening. I was wondering if you could expand on the differences between the summer protest and what we're seeing now, because in the summer, of course, it ignited this indignation, but it was a chat by, in my view, very privileged kids that get to power but have this disdain for the common people, that have this air of superiority that, to be honest, I think it's not only to them. It's like that whole political class or elite that basically takes control of the island, that have government contracts, etc. But what we have now, it's really, I mean, not only withholding the aid, but it's using it for political purposes. So it's a much deeper. I mean, it's almost like comparable to Trump. Of course, doesn't have the same repercussions in terms of the world, but wow, it's really huge, and still you don't see the same level of indignation. So I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on the differences.
I think, I'm happy to hear other perspectives on this, but I think that part of what led to the summer was that it was a kind of catharsis from not just the chat, but everything that we had held on to during Maria. For 2 years, we had, been resilient and helped each other and put up with, almost a year without electricity and never protested all of that. So I think that the summer protest was not just about the chat, but about everything that had happened over the past 2 years. And that's why it reached so many sectors, because everyone was impacted by it. And so there was this kind of, we needed to mourn. We needed to mourn our dead, but also the entire experience of violence that we suffered through for those 2 years. And so I think that now, even though what the governor now is being accused of is in more ways more outrageous and more upsetting than the bad words and you know, the things that came out in the chat. I think that perhaps because we've gone through that catharsis, you know, we don't have all of that bottled up, like they say, soltamos el golpe, right? And so I think it's going to take a little bit more time for that to build. However, at the same time, you know, the first days of when people started gathering in front of Fortaleza this time, it reminded me a lot of the summer in the sense of being surprised that people showed up, of not being able to anticipate which one was going to be, you know, a good turnout or not. And so I think that it might continue to build, especially as the governor says things like, oh, people are happy in their campsites in the southern coast. And and now also people know what they're capable of that I don't think they did before. So it remains to be seen, and it's definitely a different protest. It's never going to be the same. I've been fascinated by the guillotine that's being dragged through the streets and what that represents, you know, and so that and how it's not just about one person, Ricardo Rosselló. I think it's now about Wanda and her ilk, you know, and so all these people who have been withholding the aid. So, because, you know, the guillotine wasn't about getting rid of one person. It was about getting rid of a large sector. So it remains to be seen. I shy away from making predictions because I'm not good at them.
Somebody there?
You mentioned schools and young people and seniors. So I'm wondering, what has the impact been on the youth? So after the hurricane, no electricity, etc. So going to school and getting an education was obviously not like it, you know, not that it was great before, but and then now. So what do you see the impact is on the next generation of youth in terms of education?
I'm really struck by all the young people that I talk to, where they tell me I haven't known anything but crisis. You know, the young folks in the university, but you know, and younger, you know, they have experienced a very different Puerto Rico than the one that I experienced. And there's this group, this you know, political organization that has this name, that Se acabaron las promesas, the end of the promises, and Juan Carlos Davila is working on a documentary now about this protest movement. And I love that slogan because I think it really encapsulates something that maybe even those who created it can't fully explain. But there was a kind of promise that my generation and those who are older especially had, that, you know, if you worked hard, if you went to school, if you went to grad school, there would be a place for you in Puerto Rico. I left Puerto Rico thinking, I'm just going to go real quick to grad school and I'll come back and there'll be a job waiting for me at the university because I'm smart and hardworking, you know? And young people now, they don't have those illusions, you know? I mean, that was naive of me even then, but now it's impossible, you know, to have that kind of confidence in the future. So I think, you know, that's really tough, you know? That's part of, you know, the kind of tropi dark, you know, that Raquel Salas Rivera talks about. So there is this you know, this new generation that, but in many ways, you know, they're the ones that are going to develop a new political vocabulary for us. And another documentary that Juan Carlos has made, Generación Standby, you know, this generation that is, you know, kind of in a kind of limbo, you know, and that's not disconnected from what is happening in the United States as well, where here a lot of promises have ended also, and a lot of young people are really uncertain about their future and how they're going to pay off their college loans and all these things, right? So I think that, you know, Puerto Rico is not disconnected from all of that. If anything, it's just feeling it in a much more intense way. And so, you know, I think for my generation, I think it's important to document and listen and give space for this new generation to bring something else into being.
I think you're going to be signing books outside, is that right? So I'll wrap it up so that let's give her a hand. Ms. Robb?
You are extraordinary, Professor. You give us hope in your wisdom and in your vision. We are all so lucky to have you. And Francis, we can now see why you are one of the country's top journalists. That was a brilliant interview, and thank you so much for being with us. And we will have a book signing and some refreshments upstairs. Please join us.